In this conference, we had very informative sessions. I would like to thank the Anatolian Religion and Beliefs platform. I would like to congratulate them as well. There was an important sharing of information and a platform for discussion for all of us, which was valuable, and they definitely deserve a sincere thanks. As our presenter said, in this session, we will be focusing on a specific venue, and we will be talking about the national and international legislation. Throughout the Republican history, Hagia Sophia transformed twice. There were two different transformations, let's say. It has such an influence and places of worship that go through significant conversions, their reasons and their influences. It won't be possible to cover all these aspects in depth. However, I believe in this conference, we made great efforts to this end. We at least had some general perspective about the subject matter, the cultural influences, the influences about identity, and the rituals and the practices were topics that we covered. The collective memory and lives of the religious communities. We had several topics covered. In these conversions, laws and regulations have important roles to play. And in the preservation of human rights, law can sometimes have a limited role to play. Even if it has an influence, this can be limited and a late influence. Today, we have two valuable experts with us, and we will be talking about the national and international legislation concerning Hagia Sophia, and we will be hearing the presentations of our experts today. We have Dr. Hammer with us and Mr. Cem Sofoğlu as well. Dr. Hammer will be talking about the international legislation, while Mr. Sofoğlu will be talking about the national legislative background, and he will be sharing information with us. Now I would like to switch to English, and I would like to introduce Dr. Hammer.
Because I benefited from the work of both of these experts during my doctoral studies. Particularly Dr. Hammer's work on freedom of conscience. So this is a great opportunity. And without delay, I would like to introduce Dr. Hammer. Leonard Hammer is the Director of Outreach and Development for the Human Rights Practice graduate programs at the University of Arizona and the Stein Family Visiting Professor at the Judaic Studies Center, also at the University of Arizona. He has published books and articles on issues pertaining to international law, international human rights, cultural rights, and sacred space. He has also worked as an international expert for the Open Society Foundation and has received research grants from the United States Institute of Peace, Carnegie Council on Peace and International Affairs, the Israel Academy of Sciences, and the Taiwan Fellowship. Dr. Hammer, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be speaking in English in case that helps. And I'm going to press share screen. I hope it'll work. And I said you wanted the larger. Okay. I hope that's okay. I just had a little PowerPoint presentation that I'll present as I move forward. And it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much to be here. I'm actually in California, so I did not have a chance to even get into the earlier sessions because it was really quite early. So it's a nice way to start the week and start the day at an early hour, which is very invigorating. And I'm happy to jump into the deep end. It's really nice. And Dr. YILDIRIM, it's a pleasure to meet you as well. I have to say, I've been following some of your work as well. So it's a nice relationship. Like you said, I'd like to focus on the international obligations with regard to the ROT, with regard to the Republic of Turkey, and really just think about what the implication was or is of what happened with the Hagia Sophia basically, we had as we know, and now just to say this really quickly because I think the second presenter will focus more on what happened internally, but it's important just to have a little bit of background that the Turkish court decision revoked the Hagia Sophia status as a museum, and then President Erdogan issued a decree that the site can be open for Muslim prayer. So, and of course, and that's obviously a major change to an incredibly significant site of cultural heritage. The declaration also included that the Hagia Sophia, of course, was still open as a venue for visitors. It's a working museum that's open to outsiders. And I felt significant was the presidential spokesman, Ibrahim Kalin. He said, World Heritage status of the Hagia Sophia will not be diminished in any way. And the truth is that that's quite significant, and we'll see why with regard to the implication vis-a-vis international treaties. What I'm going to now do with you all is think about some questions and then focus on two particular treaties that Turkey has ratified and that has an obligation under, and think about the implication of those obligations, of this international obligation, and how that might relate to the Hagia Sophia. Well, clearly what happened with the Hagia Sophia was what we could call changing a site, altering a site. And I know it's recapturing. I'm not saying that it was not what it was in previous years or centuries, but basically, as it was in the present time, is changing it from a museum to a working mosque, or re-changing it back to a working mosque. And it's important also to note, and this is from the cultural heritage perception, is that there were also there are mosaics in there that depict the Holy Family and portraits of imperial Christian emperors, and presumably that can be a problem for a mosque, for a working mosque, certainly, where prayer is taking place. And finally, of course, parts of the building will be closed off to non-Muslims. So it's important to be aware of the fact that there was a change that happened here, whether it's significant or not significant, whether it alters the Hagia Sophia as a protected cultural space we could think about, but it is important to recognize what's going on. Some questions that I had, and I'm not going to relate to all these questions, they're rather quite broad, but I thought they were important to think about. One is, if a state perceives cultural heritage in a certain way and goes through certain changes, as for example what happened in Turkey, what can it then invoke its own perception of cultural heritage? If the Hagia Sophia was perceived as a certain site and now it wants to be altered into a more Islamic space, is a state allowed to do that? Can it be entitled to do that? Should it be entitled to do that? Which I think is a valid question. And of course, state autonomy and notions of thinking about defining cultural heritage, and particularly if that definition ignores pre-existing cultural heritage perceptions. Changing nature of cultural heritage as well in a particular state such as Turkey, where it has been moving from a Kemalist kind of secular context to one of Erdogan's AKP, religious-oriented society. And of course, finally, and this is a general question which all states are beset by, is how might one account for minority views of cultural heritage, which I think is an ongoing issue that we all have to grapple with on a constant basis, and it's an important question to keep in the back of our mind. What I'd like to deal with today are two treaties. One is the World Heritage Convention, which is the kind of the sine qua non typical example of what we use in today's world with regard to protecting cultural heritage property around the world, and actually, in parentheses, turning it into an international issue as well in terms of cultural heritage property protection. And of course, and secondly, the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights, which I'd like to just touch on briefly, just to demonstrate how potentially Turkey can be pushed a little bit further with regard to protection of the Hagia Sophia. Let's just take a look at the World Heritage Convention, WHC. So of course, looking at the definition, cultural heritage includes monuments which are an outstanding universal value from the point of view of history, art, and science. And the operational guidelines of the World Heritage Convention state that it includes objects that maintain an exceptional cultural significance in a manner that transcends national boundaries. I'm mentioning this just because these are the criterion that Turkey used actually in defining Hagia Sophia as a protected cultural space, internationally protected cultural space. And of course, importantly, in this particular instance is Article 6 of the World Heritage Convention. State parties are to act along with the international community to protect, conserve, and publicly present such sites using its maximum resources. And we'll see that's also important because for Turkey to make this change to a space, significant or not, can be, of course, debated, but it certainly was a pretty important change. It kind of invokes some of its obligations under the treaty. Now, thinking about this further, we could talk about the notion is that, well, what is the significance? What's the implication of having the World Heritage Convention and having its action? So, excuse me. One is that you want to allow for international opinion and focus with the state is afforded some latitude. In other words, by a state designating a site as a World Heritage Convention protected site, what you're doing is you're internationalizing that space. You're not removing sovereignty. You're not removing necessarily state control. But a state is saying that they're allowing for some type of international influence, international involvement in a particular site that's located within their sovereign space, within their own state. And of course, under the World Heritage Convention, the state is afforded a great deal of latitude, a great deal of space to operate. But nevertheless, the notion is that you're allowing for an international focus. You're allowing for the inculcation of international opinion with regard to particular spaces. In this particular instance, in 1985, the Republic of Turkey, the ROT, deemed the historic area of Istanbul, which specifically included the Hagia Sophia, as a World Heritage Convention protected site. And it did so for a bunch of reasons, which we'll talk about in the next slide, but it's important to recognize the criteria that when it listed the site by Turkey included, and I quote, Hagia Sophia became a model for an entire family of churches and later mosques, and is described by Turkey in 2013 in his 2013 report to the WHC as the Justinian churches of the Hagia Sophia. So
daha spesifik bu tekke ve zaviyelerin kapatılmasıyla ilgili bir sunum hazırladım. Ama ya bunu sunacağım zaten, bunu anlatacağım. Fakat
my presentation is all about, but having listened to Leonard's presentation, where he talked about the conversion of Hagia Sophia and Kora, and there are two court cases to overturn the decrees issued by the presidency. So there are ongoing court cases as we speak in the administrative court, and I know of these court cases, and so I'm just going to talk off the cuff during the introduction and tell you what I think about the recent developments. I listened to Leonard's presentation. So I'm going to be playing the role of the devil's advocate, if I may, and convey my personal thoughts to you first. But these places, both Hagia Sophia and the Kora church, I'm personally opposed to their conversion, and I don't approve it. But as Mr. Hammer also said, and Yıldırım Hanım also indicated previously, that these places of worship, the judicial processes can only do so much. Unfortunately, when it comes to politics and religion, you cannot solve these issues through law. The solution needs to come from politics, and then only after that, legists can find a legal basis or a legal infrastructure for a solution. So yes, we can only expect so much from law. And Mr. Hammer he also talked about the right to sovereignty of the state, and I think along the same lines, the states have right to sovereignty when it comes to matters of this nature. And when you look at these two ongoing cases, I'm not too hopeful that these those who took this matter to the court, to the constitutional court, in the courts of first instance, in Turkey, in local courts, in courts of first instance, I don't think we will be able to find a solution. I think this will go all the way up to the Constitutional Court, and they're hoping to exhaust all the local remedies and then take it to the European Court of Human Rights. But I personally think that European Court of Human Rights is going to see this as a matter of sovereignty of the state, and as such, they're not going to find it admissible, because otherwise, if the Court of Human Rights impinges on right to sovereignty, then that would undermine their own authority. And this is how I see it. This is a matter of sovereignty. In 1934, cabinet who turned the mosque, because this building from 1453 all the way up to 1934, more than 400 years, it was used as a mosque, and then it was converted into a museum in 1934, and 90 plus years afterwards, of course, we no longer have a cabinet. The system has changed. We have an executive presidential system in Turkey, and a presidential decree says that the place is to be turned into a mosque, reconverted into a mosque. And I think they can do this from a legal point of view. The state has the mandate to pull this off. Mr. Hammer talked about two international agreements. One, let me cite the entire name, Cultural Natural Heritage Protection Covenant or Agreement. And the other is the International Convention on Cultural and Political Rights. So as for the first agreement, World Heritage Agreement, Turkey actually adopted in '82, and the other, it was during the EU accession process, and it proved quite contentious at the time. But I was personally quite pleased with the fact that Turkey acceded to that convention. But certain quarters in Turkey did not want Turkey to adopt that agreement, and they opposed to it. So as per this agreement, what does Turkey guarantee? Protection of these places, right? And Turkey protects these places by turning it into a mosque. It doesn't mean that Turkey is not protecting this this particular building. I think it would be very difficult to put forth that argument. And as for the International Cultural Rights, Political Rights Convention, Article 15, preservation of places of worship, 29th article, restoration programs are to be laid down by the state, and they're doing that. The restoration is always ongoing at Hagia Sophia. I mean, there's always this scaffolding, which has always been there for years. So the entire building is always under restoration. I visited Kora Museum way back, and I don't remember any restoration activities there then, but now the whole building is under restoration. And also this building was used for 500 years as a mosque, and then it was turned into a museum, and it was reconverted into a mosque. So is this a mosque? Is this a church? We're talking about 1,000 years. I think it was built in year 500 something. Antonius and Isidorus, these two architects, built this in Eastern Rome. We shouldn't call it Byzantine Empire. It was the Eastern Roman Empire. and it functioned as a church for 1,000 years, and then it was turned into a mosque in 1453, and then for 500 or 400 years it was used as a mosque. So is this a mosque? Is this a church? And I think that this is highly contentious. So here's what I say. You know, it's all about the right of sovereignty of the states, and the states exercising their own discretion. And again, to quote Mr. Hammer, you know, cultural heritage of minorities, yes. 3,000
Doğu Roma'dan kalan
Greek
Rum
members of the Greek Orthodox community live in Istanbul. 3,000 people. We have this minority who are citizens of the Republic of Turkey, but Lausanne Treaty defines them as a minority. So, you know, is this their cultural legacy, or is this a cultural legacy of the Muslim community? So it's a very complicated matter, and I don't think legists or jurors will be able to find a solution to this. So it's down to the politicians, and also potential discrimination. Mr. Hammer said in his talk. Yes, that's correct. I mean, we're talking about 3,000 Greeks living in Turkey, you know, but they have their own churches that remain open, Greek Orthodox churches that remain open in Turkey. So this building was used as a mosque for 400 years, and then it was turned into a museum and then reconverted to a mosque. Is this a sign of discrimination? It is highly debatable, and that's the conclusion that Mr. Hammer actually reached at the end of his talk. So this is an ongoing debate, obviously. Yes, and let me move on to my own talk, having said these. But like I said, the court cases are still going on, and we will wait and see what happens. I will get in touch with the organizers of this event and fill you in on what has taken place. But I'm not all too pleased, and I'm not very optimistic that there will be a positive outcome. Let's see what the Constitutional Court says, what the European Court of Human Rights says, but I shared my personal view with you at the outset. I don't know if Mr. Hammer has any questions for me up until this point. Sir?
Aslında 10 dakika kadar daha
But actually you have 10 more minutes. And right afterwards we have a Q&A session. So if you'd like to continue, please feel free to do so. Yes, but I mean, I focused on tekkes and zaviyes. Well, yes, in the background of such transformations, there lies a mindset, and I think that your presentation is going to shed light on that mindset. So if you'd like to share that with us, so then okay, then let me share my presentation with you. Yes, because I think yes. Let me then talk about that mindset. Maybe it doesn't pertain fully to Hagia Sophia. I mean, your presentation focuses more on tekkes and zaviyes, but it gives us quite interesting inklings about the mindset behind these conversions. Yes, in 1934, Hagia Sophia no longer, and the mindset is behind the conversion of Hagia Sophia from a mosque to a museum. It's a Jacobean top-down approach, and I will give you more details about this mindset during my presentation. So please do that. And I will be very brief. And closure of places of worship, sacred places in Turkey, or transformation thereof dates back to the Republic proclaimed in 1923, a new society and a new type of citizen was being created, and this project was initiated with the Imperial Edict of Reorganization of 1839, continues with the reform-like actions of the Committee of Union. and progress following the declaration of the constitutional era in 1908 and peaked with the proclamation of the Republic. Following the abolition of the Sultanate and the Caliphate, the new regime and its elites could now start building the aforementioned new society and the individual. We must say that the Republic and its founders took the French Revolution as an example in creating this new society. It is important to mention that Ottoman sultans such as Selim III and Mahmud II followed the example of French military and bureaucratic establishments in particular. That the Committee of Union and Progress members were deeply affected by the way of thinking brought along by the French Revolution. Fraternity, equality, and the like. And the leaders of the War of Independence continued to be influenced by France. For example, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was proficient in French. And I watched a documentary recently, and he spoke great French, and his books are on display at Anıtkabir. He would always read in French. And he was influenced by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Auguste Comte. And these books are, like I said, on display at Anıtkabir. And in addition, during the establishment of independence tribunals, pioneer establishments in the dissolution of lodges and zaviyas, the National Assembly in Ankara wanted to call these tribunals revolutionary tribunals in reference to the tribunals established during the French Revolution. So the founders of the Republic were deeply influenced by the French Revolution. So this new endeavor to create a new society and a new individual, or closing down of lodges and zaviyas, it's propelled by this mindset to create a new society. And a related concept for which the Republic took inspiration from the French Revolution is the concept of laïcism. The new Republic chose to adopt a more radical practice of laïcism, a product of the French Revolution, instead of secularism, a practice which is a more moderate version of laïcism that originated in Britain.
Olan laiklik kavramını tercih etti. Şimdi Cumhuriyet'in yeni insan yaratmak için çıktığı yola bir bakalım.
Let us now take a glance at the path the Republic took to create new individuals. Primarily, this new individual was expected to be civilized, cultured, and in the words of the leader of the Republic, to have reached the level of contemporary civilization. To reach this level, a significant step was to be taken, as in the example of France. And individuals were to be secular, beyond the influences of religion and superstition, and the state should be governed by adopting this basic principle. This practice adopted the method of the Jacobins, which would format, organize, and shape society in a top-down, top-to-down manner. A number of revolutionary tools were used during the first years of the Republic to shape the society in a top-down manner. In other words, to educate and modernize it. Legal instruments were used. In 24, law on the abolition of the Caliphate and the Directorate of Foundations, and also the law on the dissolution and prohibition of lodges and zaviyas were passed. And like I said, in 24, the law on the abolition of the caliphates and the Directorate of Foundations was passed, and law on the unity of education, which is called Tevhid-i Tedrisat, in Turkish. And finally, the law on the maintenance of order, Takriri Sükun, that dates back to 1925, which gave way to the prosecution of the participants of the Sheikh Said rebellion at the independence tribunals and the closure of lodges and zaviyas. These were radical measures taken to decouple society from the influence of religion and laicize it. The head law of 1925, I'm not going to go into that. I do not wish to digress. The new regime held the opinion that in order to establish a top-to-down social order, some organizations inherited by the old regime, the ancien regime of the Ottoman Empire, had to be liquidated. Amongst these, religious orders and lodges and zaviyas they operated were at the forefront, since they were centers of reactionism and superstition, according to the new regime, which adopted a positivist way of thinking. It was not within possibility to tolerate these establishments. And in addition, it was assumed that the religious orders had organized in lodges and zaviyas to oppose the newly founded republic and as such constitute a potential threat. In fact, they were not way off the mark. In Iran, mullahs toppled down the Shah regime. They were proponents of the Islamic regime, and they organized in mosques and prepared for the revolution in the mosques. Talks at the National Assembly on the closure of lodges and zaviyas emphasized that these establishments harbored activities against the Republic, and that these activities had the potential to be significant centers of opposition. Another justification for the closure of lodges and zaviyas was the fact that these establishments were centers of superstition. To quote Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's Kastamonu speech in prior to the declaration of law on the dissolution of lodges and zaviyas, with the law on the abolition of the Directorate of Foundations ratified on March the 3rd, 1924, the state had all the mosques, masjids, lodges, and zaviyas under its control. Meanwhile, the Independence Tribunal established in Ankara made decisions during the trials recommending the closure of lodges and zaviyas, which were assumed to be centers of Islamic politics. Subsequently, following the Sheikh Said rebellion in 1925, the Independence Tribunal established in the region started to shut down lodges and zaviyas based on law on the maintenance of order and on the grounds that these lodges and zaviyas were connected to the rebellion. Mr. Sofoğlu, sorry to chime in, but your time is up. Could you please wrap up? All right. So these places were confiscated, and the economic power of these sects were taken away. So politically, they were defanged as well. And since then, no lodge and zawiya have been opened up, but certain shrines and certain people. So there's this de facto situation in Turkey, and that's how it is. And that's all from me. Thank you. Thank you very much to both our speakers. This has been very interesting. Now, we have 20 minutes for discussion. I have a few brief contributions. It's been a long day, so let's make sure that we stick to our time limits.
Interesting to see the limitations of both of these treaties, and also some opportunities they provide, especially for oversight and engagement of also civil society. So the treaty bodies don't have the possibility to obviously enforce their recommendations. However, they trigger important mechanisms actually that where the states have to respond. Whether that is satisfactory or not is a different question, but they have to respond, and also civil society actors, religion or belief communities can also participate in this oversight process. Especially, I would like to draw attention to the World Heritage Committee, which says it relies on citizens actually to protect cultural heritage sites, and invites observations and interventions from individuals and groups so they can raise their concerns. I know that, for example, Mr. Sofoğlu mentioned that Turkey will actually do a good job of preserving Hagia Sophia. But for example, yesterday morning, we heard from Dr. Umut Azrak, if I remember her name correctly, that she had visited the Hagia Sophia and she saw that actually the mosaics of Mary and Jesus were curtailed all the time. So not only during prayer times, but because people were praying inside the Hagia Sophia, not only during prayer times, but also other times. So it was always veiled. And as far as I understand, it was important for the World Heritage Committee that the art effects are accessible to everyone, at least at certain times. So I don't know, I think it's important to continue to monitor the situation within Hagia Sophia and access of everyone, not only Christians or Greek community, but of everyone, because it is considered to be of universal value. So it's not only of value to the Christian communities in Turkey. I also wanted to say a few things about the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which also has the periodic reporting process. And Turkey submits regular reports to the committee, as Dr. Hammer mentioned. And I would like to encourage those who listen to us, also the participants, to actively engage with this process, because NGOs or groups of individuals can make submissions to the committee. And if they need more information about this, they could certainly get in touch with Etkiniz, which is helping with this conference today, and also the Alevi Philosophy Center or Freedom of Belief Initiative. So there are organizations that can help groups or institutions to be part of this oversight process. I have one question for Dr. Hammer, and that's related in a way a follow-up to what you have shared about General Comment 21 on Article 15, where it talks about respect and protection of cultural heritage in all of its forms in times of peace and war. And it says that cultural heritage must be preserved, developed, and reached and transmitted to future generations as a record of human experience and aspirations in order to encourage creativity in all its diversity and inspire a genuine dialogue between cultures. This might be a bit a naive question, but I'm wondering how actually this can be viewed as the rights of future generations. So how could children or youth be engaged in this oversight? Or could they claim that this is a right for them to be able to enjoy this cultural heritage? I thought I was inspired a bit about the youth engagement with environmental sustainability, and I wonder if some parallels can be drawn here. Şimdi Türkçe'ye geçiyorum.
Now I switch back to Turkish. And in Mr. Sofoğlu's presentation, we had comments about the Hagia Sophia decision, as well as the closure of the lodges and zaviyas, and to what extent such decisions were complex, could be complex. He showed us that the law has a limited role to play, and the role such a role is usually under the influence of the politics or the dominant powers who can create this change, and it is the measures that they take are sort of being legitimized by law. By taking a decision, there is a foundation for legitimization in such decisions. So my question for you, Mr. Sofoğlu, is as follows. The decision of the Supreme Court concerning the Hagia Sophia, some of the things that were in focus was there. So the endowment at the time by Mehmet the Conqueror, and his wish was prioritized. And in the cabinet decision of 1934, that decision was found against law and it was cancelled. So Supreme Court previously made use of a decision taken by the European Court of Human Rights, and they say that statute of limitations does not apply here. So I wonder if we talk about other endowments concerning the lodges and zaviyas, regarding those, at the moment, can they claim a similar right? Because during the Ottoman period, there were different places of worship, and connected to this, there were endowments. So, contrary to their will, these can be used, like there are churches that are being used for producing tapestry, and there are buildings used as children's libraries, which are converted from mosques. So can we be confronted with a series of court cases in an attempt to cancel such conversions? So I can continue with the coming questions, but I can immediately answer your question, in fact. For the effective use of, let's compile all the questions. I don't think this will create a problem for the presenter. As you desire, she says. So I'm reading this from Zeynep Aktüre. Ben şeytanın
an ICOMOS member and an expert of Turkey's National Commission for UNESCO. I would like to highlight that WHC operational guidelines request prior notice for major restorations or new constructions and not for function changes. And the function changes in Hagia Sophia is perhaps rightfully promoted as providing free access, as different from the ticketed entrance for all visitors, as is the case in all mosques. And then she kindly shared the whole full text of Article 172, but I will not read it, as I'm sure Dr. Leonard knows this article. And then she adds, but this does not, of course, alter the validity of Professor Hammer's main points. So that's a question for Professor Hammer. And then we have another question. Türkçe'ye tekrar dönüyorum. Sayın Sofoğlu'na
I switch back to Turkish. A question for Mr. Sofoğlu, especially in the European Court of Human Rights Grand Chamber, İzzettin Doğan and others Turkey judgment. International law, based on international law, a faith group, a place of worship is where that group resides, and the political parties do not have a right there. Would you like to comment on this? So in the, you said that such a change when brought to the European Court, I am not optimistic about the decision you said. So can you comment from this perspective? So this was a question from İşler Gözaydın. So we nearly have 10 minutes until we finish. I will give 5 minutes each, if you like. And let us start once again with Dr. Hammer.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great comments. And Professor Safolo, it's such a pleasure to hear what you had to say as well. I'm just going to address some of what you said because it was really insightful and very beneficial, I think, to our discourse here. And that is that it's important to recognize that post-1935, certainly post-World War II, there's been an alteration as to how we perceive sovereignty and how we perceive the actions of a state and what it can or cannot do. You could call it a global governance type of approach or a constructivist approach to international relations. But what I'm getting at is that clearly changes happening to a place like Hagia Sophia reflect changes in the political winds, if you will, in a particular society, in particular changes that are happening to a particular state. The potential difference is that we now have greater involvement of international bodies, certainly post-World War II. And when we look at the World Heritage Convention post-1972 or 75 onward, states really recognize the role that it has to play. And that's kind of what I was thinking about and really, kind of playing with and thinking about what that influence can have or might have on Turkey, although I agree it's not much in terms of any substantive way. But it was good points what you made, and I think it's just important to account for the alteration that happens to Turkey. ECHR, I totally agree with you. I didn't deal with it because it's going to be really hard to find a basis of protection therein, pursuant to how the rights are interpreted under the ECHR, but potentially under the minority aspect. But again, I think it will be difficult to demonstrate, and they probably will not touch it. I kind of agree with you on that. Dr. Yildirim, that was great on the engagement of youth. I love that. Those issues are actually, interestingly, just to combine the two parts of the discussion, are meant to be, certainly engagement of youth, are meant to be in WHC plans. When you designate a site as a World Heritage Convention site, so you're then supposed to have some type of action plan. And there's always a push for engagement of youth in a kind of broader sense. I'm not sure I'm exactly answering your question, but that is the idea there. And there's almost no doubt in my mind that when they, and I have not, and this might be another good article to think about it, looking at the General Comment 21 from the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and thinking about, well, gosh, to what extent did they account for and take into account, integrate the WHC, and I'm pretty sure they did, just looking at some of the notes that went on there, but it does merit, it would merit, I think, more of a look into that. I hope that answers your question, and not entirely, I think, but it touches. And the UNESCO major restorations, 100%, and you can really parse this up, as lawyers, as we are wont to do, as we generally tend to do, into making these distinctions. I think the key, though, is, and this is really important here, and I do have to mention a colleague of mine, Professor Peter Petkoff from Regent's College in Brunel in the UK, has been writing to me during this as well, because thankfully he's watching, and he made some points about the changes that actually, the physical changes that have occurred in Hagia Sophia over the past couple of years, and post turning it into a mosque itself. And what I'm getting at is that, yes, major restorations, but if it's going to have an impact upon changes to the site, its capacity for preservation, then you're entering into the domain of potentially of WHC and World Heritage Convention alterations to a protected site. And I guess what I'm getting at is that once the state designates a site as protected site, it becomes a very sensitive matter with regard to what kind of changes can be done there. And even what might not be perceived as major still might be perceived as having an impact upon its capacity for preservation. And I think that's really what's going to have to be sussed out here. I'm not by any means an expert on, you know, facts on the ground and what's really happening, and carpets that are covering mosaics and things like that. But I'm just from reading, from what I'm seeing, from reading, first of all, Professor Petkov sent me, but also other reports, is that there are shifts that are happening to its capacity to preserve the site itself. And I think that's the ultimate. That's really what's important here.
Thank you so much. Over to Mr. Sofoğlu. Buyurun Sofo ve Cem Bey, sizde söz.
Cem Bey, sizi duyamıyoruz şu an.
Cem Bey, can you please unmute your mic? Thank you.
Mikrofonunuzu açabilir misiniz?
Geliyor mu sesim?
Şu anda geliyor. Çok
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Söz bende değil mi şimdi? Sayın Hamer'e
Mr. Hammer, let me say a few words about what he said and then entertain the questions. These physical changes are not acceptable and in contravention with the agreements that we have talked about. I haven't seen them myself, to be frank. I haven't been to the Hagia Sophia, but the physical changes there, the fact that the curtain is always closed, to the best of my knowledge, it can then be used as a museum, i.e. it's open to visitors, save for namaz hours. But if there's a curtain, there's no point in going there, especially for foreign visitors, right? Or for Turkish visitors for that matter, because these people go there to see the mosaics, and if they can't see them, then there's no point. And this is in contravention with the agreement. I agree with that, and Turkey should not do that. As for Council of State, I don't know what to make of it. In the past, this association took this to court twice. I forget the name of the association. It was turned down twice, and the entire legal process came to an end, and it was final. It was an absolute ruling. So if you cannot take something to the court if there's an absolute ruling, a final ruling on a given matter, and then they took it to the court for a third time, and I expected Council of State to just reject it because there was an absolute ruling from the past, and the Council of State did not do that. And I'm thinking that this was a political decision, politically motivated decision. How about the implication of this ruling?
Temel alınarak açılmadı. Bu karara gerek yoktu zaten.
There was no need for this decision. It was a cabinet decision to turn the mosque into a museum. There was no court order in 1934, and today the presidential decree could have turned it from a museum to a mosque. So there was no need to get the blessings of the Council of State, right? And I'm thinking that they used it as a pretext, a political pretext, to tell us that they adhere to law, to the rule of law. So they simply used it as a pretext. But I don't think legally they needed that, because, like I said, there was a final ruling, and the Council of State shouldn't have even looked into the third application. But just to be able to say that there's a court ruling, they got the Council of State to basically announce that decision. This was one of your questions, and the other had to do with foundations, if I'm not mistaken. And Fatih Sultan Mehmet Han Vakf, in Vakfs you have, it is bequeathed to the next generations, and Fatih Sultan Mehmet had no heirs. There's another foundation, a Vakf called Beyazıt Vakf. It was established by a vizier or these foundations are established by viziers or sultans, if they don't have an heir, then the Vakıflar Genel Müdürlüğü, General Directorate of Foundations, what they do is they're in charge of the assets of that wakf. Because there's no heir, but they have certain assets. Who is going to be in charge? The DG of foundations, right? So the decision is going to be made by the DG of foundations because there's no heir. And in this particular instance, in Hagia Sophia, this foundation is an outsider. It's not like the foundation had any role to play. And you know, the Council of State should have said, "What's it to you anyway?" Because if you need to be a beneficiary to you know, take it to the court, and that association was in no position a beneficiary, so they do not have that license to be a side, a party, and take it to the court. And previously, the Council of State turned it down because of this reason. They said simply that they were no beneficiary. Can other foundations do it? Yes, I mean the DG of foundations. I'm talking about Osmanlı, Ottoman foundations, because many of these, I mean, do not have heirs, anyone to inherit the assets. There are some, but there's a foundation who had 500 heirs. I'm not going to name names. They came to me and I rejected the file because, you know, they're still trying to find legal representation. And this holds true for Ottoman foundations. As for minority communities foundations, these foundations, in actual fact, they lost their assets in the 90s, especially Greek foundations. They lost all their assets. You know, almost half of them is gone, and the law on foundations were amended 6 or 7 years ago by the AKP government. It was a step in the right direction, and they were then able to seek compensation or damages. Other foundations, such as Syriac, Armenian, and Jewish foundations, you know, they can also do the same if they have any such claims. So they have that legal right, but in practice, to put it simply, I don't know how it is. And one last question. İştar, my dear friend İştar Gözaydın asked a question on Cemeviz, the European Court of Human Rights ruling. People pray wherever they please, and that's a right ruling for Cemeviz, and it should be put into practice without delay. And I fully, heartily support this decision. But regarding Hagia Sophia, I mean, can people go and worship at Hagia Sophia? I don't think the European Court of Human Rights is going to make such a decision. Bearing in mind the historical perspective, I don't think that's realistic to expect that from the European Court of Human Rights. I personally do not think that that is going to be the case. And I think I made a mistake because İştar explained this with another question. Right now, they're turning a blind eye to Cemeviz. So in line with Cemeviz, I think that was. Can you please repeat? İştar asked the second question to elaborate on the first one, and said this is in line with Cemeviz, not Hagia Sophia. I misunderstood it, apparently. Okay, so Cemeviz, I think that it's a great ruling. People should be able to pray wherever they please, and the state has no right whatsoever to intervene in that. So I welcome the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. That's my personal opinion. Yes, I guess I'm the final speaker. Yes, that is correct. I think we have entertained all the questions. There are no further questions. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but and well, Motika is going to be joining us shortly, right? Yes, and if he's here, watching us. He speaks wonderful Turkish. I had the pleasure of meeting him in Istanbul at Orient Institute, and I give him my regards. And I'm guessing that he's going to speak in Turkish. Like I said, he speaks wonderful Turkish. And it's a small world. And here we are online, seeing each other, rubbing shoulders, albeit electronically. Thank you. And also, Leonard, thank you so much. It was a great conversation with you during this session. Thank you, everyone. All my love to California. Thank you very much to both our speakers for their wonderful, wonderful presentations and for answering our questions. This was very informative, and I'd like to then give the floor to our MC. Also, if you'd like to continue the discussion, please feel free to join the ADİP forum to continue this interesting conversation.